The amazing thing to me is that I have forgotten most of the details of the second half of my life, but I retain a lot of detail of the earlier part. I wonder how much, if I can trigger some memories in you. I can go back to Lostwithiel. World War I was on when I started becoming conscious, I guess. But I can remember back to the days when you were a day boy at Foy Grammar School, and later on you went to Probus School as a boarder. I have no idea where Probus was. And I remember so well what Lostwithiel was like back in those days, and the people who lived there. Of course, there were the Rob Peases and the Chamberlains, and Uncle Beat and Auntie Maggie and Nora and Margaret and Bill and Nancy. And when they moved to the Isle of Wight, the Jack Peases came and moved into the house that they had vacated. And then, of course, there was Uncle Will and Mabel across the river and up the hill. And then there was our garden with the chicken run at the bottom and the asparagus bed and the bamboo in the corner and the veranda. And then, of course, there was the Ford that Dad bought the year that I was born, 1912. And the registration number of the Model T Ford was AF771. And the Ford was looked after by Hancock. Do you remember Hancock? An ex-seaman who looked after the Ford and did odd jobs about the place and drove the car on occasions. And then there was the Skelton's Garage, and what was her name? Yes, Biswarwick. The Biswarwicks ran a sort of general store, as I recall, in 4th Street. And there was right opposite us, opposite Avery's house on Bodmin Hill, there was a row of little small terrace houses, and in the last one there lived a family of Belgian refugees by the name of Van de Kerko. And I remember there was a battalion of Sherwood Foresters under canvas at the top of Old Bodmin Hill in training, and they didn't have a medical officer, so Dad was appointed temporary medical officer while they were there. And I remember every day the orderly corporal used to march the men who had reported sick down the hill to our place, to Avery's house, and the soldiers would stand around in the garage yard smoking woodbines, and each one waiting for his turn to convince the doctor that he was unfit for duty. And we got to know quite a number of the officers of that battalion on a social level. And I remember when that battalion marched down Bodmin Hill past the house in column of fours in field service marching order on their way to the front. They trained in Lostwithiel, and off they went and across to France. And less than 3 months later, we heard that they had been almost completely wiped out in some horrible offensive, World War I type offensive. And then there was Dad's surgery in Laren, and at low tide you could drive the ford across Laren River. There was a ford there that you could drive through at low tide, and it would save you a couple of miles of driving, and that was always a thrill when we did that. And once a week, Mother used to take the chickens for a walk around the block because she thought that they needed a change of scene. She would herd them with a bamboo stick, like a herd of sheep, because she thought that their lives were too boring being stuck in a chicken run all the time. And then when we moved to Molesey, I remember when the furniture arrived from Lostwithiel, the movers had brought 2 garden rollers. One was a big iron one, split into 2 halves so that you could steer it and turn it more easily. The other one was of solid Cornish granite that must have weighed 600 pounds at least. And they had brought these things all the way from Cornwall to East Molesey. And then, of course, in East Molesey, there was the palace and the boats that we used to be able to rent, punts and skiffs. And there was Molesey Regatta with the fireworks and Hurst Park races. I remember we used to sit on that stone wall at Archamont watching the crowds when they came away from the racetrack, making for the station. A lot of them used to come down Palace Road past our place. And you were at a prep school in Surbiton, whose name I've forgotten, and Scarum. Do you remember Scarum, the black and tan mongrel who was such a character? I remember he used every afternoon at the time of day that we expected you back from your prep school, he would be in the dining room on the couch looking out of the bay window, and as soon as he saw you on your bicycle turn into the lane that went up along the side of our garden, he would rush to the back door and make a big fuss until somebody had hung the key to the bicycle shed round his neck, and then he would be let out of the back door and he would rush up to the other end of the garden and meet you with the key to the bicycle shed. You were his hero. To him, you were the leader of the pack. The bicycle shed was before we built the garage. When Dad bought the Citroen, we built a garage in that corner where the bicycle shed was. And you remember the big horse chestnut tree right by the garage that we had a tree house in, and we did so much climbing there. And you remember Dad had a rule that we could only take a boat out alone if we could swim across the Thames at Hampton Court fully dressed, including a pair of shoes. And I remember when Ethel took that test, she got dressed in some old clothes and a pair of shoes, and she was such a devil. And when she threw herself into the water to swim across, and Dad was standing by in a dinghy to be close to you as you swam across to help you if you got into any difficulties. But as Ethel threw herself into the water, she let out a scream, and a young man in immaculate white flannel trousers was about to jump into the river to save her when Dad shouted to him to stop. It was all just an act on Ethel's part. But when we had passed that test, we were permitted to get a boat from the boat livery and go out alone in a boat. And then the holidays that we used to have at Chiddock, at the Swiss Cottage and Thorncombe Cottage, and how we used to fish from the beach with lines. We'd throw a line with a lead weight on it and about 6 baited hooks, and we'd sling it out into the sea and gradually pull it in, and if you were lucky, you got a nice place or sole, or an old boot or something. And there was that crew of professional fishermen headed by Young. He was not Mr. Young, he was Young, and he was the skipper of the fishing community in Seatown. And he used to swear like a seaman, and I don't think that the ants realized that he was swearing. They never stopped us listening to him when he got mad and was yelling at his men when the net broke. He used to use the most lurid language. I think that the ants thought that the obscenities were technical terms connected with the business of catching mackerel. And then we used to walk out to the rocks at low tide at the foot of Golden Cap with those round nets that we used to bait, and we used to catch shrimp and prawn and occasionally a big lobster. I could go on for hours, and I hope to fill at least one side of a cassette, but I'm anxious to get this in the mail in time for you to get it by your birthday, and it's the 14th already, I believe. So I will start wrapping it up now. The photographs I'm enclosing are copies of a studio portrait that was taken we all had our portraits taken to make an illustrated church directory at Christ Episcopal Church in Dearborn. Notice the old school tie. One of the copies is for Anne. I think she said that she would like a copy. Anyway, happy birthday, many happy returns. Take care of yourself. And if you can, write to me or have Anne write. So I'm signing off now with fondest love. Goodbye.